So in this video, we'll be changing the rear brakes on this 2005 Honda Pilot, and it's a pretty simple process, so let's get started. Since these rotors here are good and don't need to be replaced, we don't have to take the whole caliper off and struggle to get the caliper bolts off, which can be a pretty big pain. If you take off the bottom guide pin bolt, which is down here, then this whole mechanism will slide up. We can pop the brake pads out, put the new ones in, compress the cylinder, and put it all back together. So now we'll take a breaker bar with a 12mm socket on the bottom guide pin bolt. We should break this loose, just like that. Now that broke loose, and we can take it out the rest of the way with the ratchet. There we go. So right now it is possible with this one bolt down here, we can take this and it pries out like that. Now this whole mechanism will swing out just like that. We could pop the pads out, put new ones in, but we want to make sure that these guide pins are sliding smooth. So we want to clean them up and put grease on them because that's very important. So we're going to go ahead and take the top bolt off here so we can do that with the top guide pin. Now we can go ahead and break loose the top bolt here. There we go. So now we can take the screwdriver and just pry out the whole piece here. And just wiggle it all off. And now we have this piece separate, and we'll take a piece of wire and hook it up here so we don't crimp that hose. So here's the hose you're trying not to crimp. If you let it hang by the hose, you could tear it or crimp it, and that would be a big problem. So now we can just take this rubber boot that's on the guide pins and pull it back. It should come over that lip, and now we can pull the guide pin out. I can feel it. Feels pretty stiff and corroded in there. Yeah, that is dirty. You can see a lot of corrosion there, so this really needs cleaned up. Now we'll do the same thing to the bottom one here. We'll take off the rubber boot. And this one slides out a lot better, but it still is dirty and needs cleaned. So these two guide pins are different, so you don't want to get them mixed up. This one doesn't have the little rubber piece up here. This is the bottom one, and then the top one has that rubber piece. So now we'll just take a rag and try to wipe off some of that old grease and try to get off some of the junk and rust. And then once we get all the grease cleaned off, we'll just take a file and use that just lightly to knock off some of the scale that's up here. So the actual guide pin here should be very clean, almost like a mirror polished finish, but you can see there's some corrosion on here, and this just needs to be cleaned up. So you have a fine piece of 600 grit, you could use 1200, just fine sandpaper, and just use that just to clean that corrosion off, and that stuff comes off pretty easy. You can get one of these cotton polishing wheels at Harbor Freight for about $5, and they work great. So we're just going to use this to buff this up real quick. Sandpaper works great if you don't have one of these. So now with a rag, I'll wipe it off. And I can already see that is, whoa, that is shiny. We compare that to the old one, there's a big difference. Alright, now I have all this cleaned up. Let's go ahead and wipe this off. Yeah, and this one looks amazing. This polishing wheel does such a good job. I think whenever you buy these from the store, they aren't even this shiny. That looks really nice. So now we'll take some grease for the guide pins, and we'll just put it on there, smear it around a little bit with our fingers, and then we can put this into place and just work that grease in, move it back and forth until this glides smoothly. Now we can do the same thing to the bottom one, and that top guide pin, it has that rubber grommet at the end of it, so that's gonna make it not glide quite as smooth, or not as easy. It's still gonna be gliding smooth, it just doesn't want to feel crunchy. Now that glides really smooth. That is much better than what it was before. And same with this one up on top. This one glides much smoother. It's not crunchy. I don't feel the grit in there anymore. So that's a lot better. So now we can go ahead and pry out these pads here because they are pretty low. And we'll just pry them out with a screwdriver like that. And they come out just like that. And these definitely needed replaced. So make sure that these guides here are just really smooth. You can scrape them a little bit with a screwdriver, spray them down with some brake cleaner. So you can just take some coarse sandpaper and just try to clean this out and get some of that corrosion off so the pads will slide nice and smooth. So if we put our new pad in right here in the guides, and then we try to fit the top of it on, you can see it's not gonna fit. It's a little bit too tall here, so we need to kind of chop off a little down here, a little up here, and clean up the sides a little bit with the grinder so this pad will fit in there and glide smoothly. So we're gonna use a bench grinder to get this to fit. You could use a file or anything else, but it's important that these brakes slide. This is not a step you wanna skip. Alright, let's go ahead and see if this fits. We'll put it in there, and I can tell that side fits better. It'll slide smoother. But this side is still just a little too tall, so we'll chop a little bit off the ends. Let's go ahead and see if this fits. So if I put the pad in now, you can see I can get it to fit in there, but it's tight and it doesn't want to go in the entire way there, so I just need to chop a little bit off. I want it to glide smoothly, but I don't want it to be wiggling around and be too loose, so I just need to chop a little bit off the top, and then this will slide back and forth but still be snug. Now we'll put the pad in, put the top on, and that slides in. I can feel it go, and now this smoothly slides up to the rotor, and that's what you want to see. Just go in nice and easy, and then we'll do the same thing to the other pad. So if we take the brake pad and put it in there for this side, it definitely doesn't fit, and from the factory they usually won't, but this just needs a little bit around there. I've had it sometimes where you take the brake pad and it just goes right in, but a lot of times it doesn't. And it's also a good idea on the brake pads just to put a little bit of grease on these so they'll slide smoother. So the first time grinding, I got it in, and I can get the pad to fit, but it just gets a little tight near it at the end, and that's not quite what we want. This one won't fit in quite all the way, so I probably made a little bit of a taper there. So I just need to take a little bit off and then it'll fit. And even an angle grinder will work great for these brake pads, but I've even done it with a file and that worked. But just make sure these glide smooth. So now we'll go ahead and put this in, just like that. And that slides in there nice, meets up to the rotor, and that's just how we want it. So these pads are fit. So we'll add a little bit of grease to those tabs, and then that'll slide even smoother, and then we can put everything back together. Now let's go ahead and just take these out again, and just put that grease on the ends here, so that'll slide back and forth even easier. And then we'll put the grease on the second pad here. And it's not the end of the world if you get grease on the pad. Just put some like brake cleaner on it, and then that'll clean everything up. Now we'll push everything together and we can put this caliper back on. So it's important to take this rubber and snap it over this little ridge here, because if you forget to do that, rust will kind of creep in there, and then you'll have to kind of redo everything we did with the guide pins and clean them up, and it'll seize, which is kind of a pain. Your brakes will seize, and that's not what you want to happen. So now we'll take the caliper off here, and then we'll take the wire out. Now I like to put a old brake pad in there, and then we can push down on that, but this piston is up too far. I can't fit that pad and the tool in, so I'm just gonna push down on the piston like this, just real easy, and the piston should glide down smoothly. If it's going down crunchy or it's really hard to push down, there's something wrong. So now go ahead and just keep pushing it down nice and slow. Make sure there's no leaks, and it should just be going down nice and even. Now that the piston is down a little bit, I can show you how to do it with the brake pad. So if you put the old brake pad in, then we can fit our tool in there. And this is the same thing with a C-clamp. And just tighten this down. And now you'll feel the brake cylinders start going down. And then it'll go all the way down to the bottom. You'll feel it bottom out. So it's seated all the way down as far as it'll go. So I'll take this tool out, take out the brake pad. So this rubber boot around here was kind of coming out a little bit, so we're just gonna very carefully with a screwdriver push this back into place, except don't put very much pressure on that rubber because you don't want to poke a hole in it. So just work it until it's where it should be, and now we can slide this back over, and then we can put these bolts in here with a little bit of anti-seize. So now we'll just take some anti-seize, put it on the threads there, and then we can go ahead and put this in and just put it in as far as you can by hand, and then we'll tighten it down and then we'll torque it. And we'll do the same thing to the bottom one. It can be a little tricky to line these up sometimes, but here we go. So now we'll just tighten these down with the ratchet. So now we'll go ahead and torque these up to 27 foot-pounds. And do note that whenever you're tightening these, it's not gonna have a very crisp like click whenever you're tightening lug nuts. Since we're at a lower torque, it'll be a little harder to notice. You just gotta feel for it right there, and then we'll do that to the bottom bolt here right there. So now both of these are torqued to 27 foot-pounds. So now we'll go ahead and put the wheel on. While it's on the ground, I'm gonna try to kind of align it with the lug nuts is the best that I can. Now I'm gonna lift it up and try to put my feet under it so it's not as much of a lift, and then I can just kind of play around with it until it fits on. It's always, there we go, that was pretty easy. And then we can take the lug nuts and put them on so the wheel will stay. So when you're tightening these down, if you want the wheel to sit evenly, you tighten it in a star pattern. So you go across like this, and then that will kind of tighten up this side, and then you'll go from that side, and this will make sure the wheel is on there nice and even, and it won't be wobbling. So now we can go ahead and lower the car on the ground, and then we can torque the wheels. So we're gonna torque these wheels to 88 foot-pounds. So since we just retracted the cylinder, it needs to be kind of recompressed, so we'll pump the pedal a few times, you'll feel it go to the floor a few times, and it'll regain pedal and pressure. There we go. That's getting nice and stiff, and I can feel it with the pressure. So it seems like it's stopping pretty good, and now we're gonna go ahead and just bed the brakes in and make sure they're all seated. So we just took it out for a test drive, bedded the brakes in, and it seemed to work great. And this is how you change the rear brakes on a 2005 Honda Pilot.